and welcome to our last lecture on the Indigenous art of the Americas, where we'll be looking at some of the First Nations of America and Canada. So the terms in which we use to describe many of the peoples of the artworks that we'll study were made later by more European names in terms of based off of their language and just other different types of categories. So many of these are made up of several tribes and nations who had contact and conflict with one another, etc. And in fact, let's talk about some misconceptions. So here's an example of, when you think of Indigenous Americans, of Native American tribes, that they're split up in this nice regional differences. And we do have a tendency to categorize different areas based on the geographical differences. But here's a more accurate portrayal when you consider the different language distributions of many of the Native American tribes across America. During my graduate degree in art history, I was studying with another girl who was a Native American, and she was studying this photography of Native Americans and how it was exaggerated. But she talked about how so often we hear about, the Cherokee Nation. And that's another misconception, in that these other names of different tribes and other peoples have just been categorized under Cherokee. So even when doing a blood test, etc., it may pop up as Cherokee because that's the only one listed, but really it's so much more complex than that. I mean, just consider the amount of different languages spoken across America and Canada. And in fact, when it comes down to it, here's more of the reality of the different Native American distribution. So there's this idea of primitivism that came about 1800s. So consider before this, we've been talking about how the Portuguese and the Spanish, we talked about the Spanish conquering many of the indigenous peoples of Central and South America. And so there was this idea of the indigenous were these heathens, and they needed to be civilized, and so they destroyed their culture and religion, and they were seen really as lesser than. There's this pendulum swing that goes on the other way, where then there's this idea of primitivism, and there's later on, which we still see in modern time particularly, is that, these indigenous Americans and tribal people across the globe really just have life figured out. They live out these perfect lives, and they don't have issues, and they're one with nature, and there's this real idealization of them. And that is just as wrong or faulty in terms of where all human nature across time is extremely complex. We are complex human beings. Hopefully one thing that you're getting from this course is, again, across time, across the globe, is that we have so much in common, is that we are all complex beings. And so the idea of Native American tribes always having one little area and living out peacefully with nature and having no issues is degrading in a way. All people are complex. Now, yes, of course, hopefully you've taken a U.S. history course and learned of the just horrendous actions of the U.S. government with relocating these people and the Trail of Tears. We'll discuss how the attempted extinction of the buffalo was really an attempt to destroy the entire livelihood of many of these Native American tribes. So we'll see that in terms of the art and this need for survival and ways of adapting. But anyway, so I just want to reiterate that life is very complex, that different peoples are battling for different natural resources and areas. You have a mostly nomadic type of lifestyle across many of these areas of North America, and so they're following their food, they're primarily buffalo in certain regions, but that things are complex. So they aren't what we often hear about. Even just in Texas, look at Houston and how many different peoples have been in this area. So we have many tribes just in the state of Texas. So you can imagine across America and Canada as a whole. Okay, so for the most part, this more geographical overview, some of these areas are also united by cultural similarities, but again, I mean, there's many languages spoken in one different region, so we are very much generalizing with today's lecture for the sake of time. And so let's start with the bandolier bag by the Lenape people. So the Lenape tribe is our eastern woodlands, Delaware tribe, part of the larger Algonquin nation. And we're looking at this bag, and bandolier is talking about a crossbody bag. So the name is the function of it. But let's appreciate for a moment the designs here and just the amount of time and effort it took to create this bag. These are each tiny, tiny, tiny little beads. So there are these beads called seed beads, and I mean, they're so small. They're the size of seeds. And so this is very, very difficult to make. I mean, of just how labor intensive and time consuming it is. And so let's take a moment to appreciate how all these tiny, tiny beads make up the designs here. Now we're in a time period, of course, where many of these tribes have been moved by the American government. And so what we're seeing, and we've already had contact with European nations, and there's already been trade, etc. And so what we're seeing here is leather, which is from this region, but many of the beadworks come from Europe. In fact, some of these beads are specifically from the Czech Republic. They were really known for these beads. Now, the beads had been an important aspect of numerous Native American culture, numerous Native American tribes. And in fact, in this region, porcupine quills had often been used for beads. So porcupine quills are actually hollow throughout the center, and so you can use them as beads. And so they were appreciated. I mean, take this one, for example. It's beautiful. So these beads were sacred. These glass beads were used to decorate many items, and they'd been acquired from European settlers through trade. So the beads are also a sacred material. One of the things is when we're looking, like what we talked about with Central and South America, when we're looking at these in the context of a museum, it really takes away the agency of these artworks and the real meaning of these objects, as they were much more than just pretty to look at and aesthetically pleasing, is that they were functional and had cultural and often spiritual significance. And so, this is what's considered part of the prairie style of this region. Now, these bags were actually made by women, by these women, and they were worn by men. So just note that here's another example compared to our tunic of the Incan Empire, and how these were very valuable and prized goods made a very specific way, under great appreciation. So they were objects of prestige and identity. The intricacies and designs of this one indicates the elevated status of the individual who would wear this. Okay, so here's the transformation mask. You were to watch a video that showed how this mask opens and closes. So this transformation mask is of the Kwakwaka'wakw tribe. The last W is silent. And this is a type of mask that's really unique to the Native Americans of the Northwest Coast, leaning more into Canada. And it was part of a ritual dance. So when we're looking at just the mask, that's only a small portion of this object. It would have had a full costume, this full regalia, and used for specific gatherings, particularly for what are called potlatches. And so these were these celebrations and gatherings where more wealthier members of the tribe would host them, and they would be handing out gifts to other members of the tribe to spread this wealth, as well as just like any humans showing off their prestige. And many tribes would gather, they'd be exchanging gifts, and ritual dance would be incorporated. So for many of these type of ceremony gatherings and celebrations, across North America, across America and Canada, there's this importance of ritual dance. And so we would have seen that with this mask as well, as part of a full costume, and there was a ritual dance involved with it. Now, each clan is associated with a sacred animal. The raven is a trickster animal, but many of his stories for certain tribes led to finding food or access to other important means of life. The thunderbird is this mythical supernatural bird. We also see the eagle, the wolf, the bear, orca, etc. And so these masks, in this case, we have this bird and where it's closed, and then it opens and you can see the ancestor associated with it. And these masks help to preserve and convey these traditional stories. The dancer will take on the personality of the spirit depicted in this dance. It is this transformational process, this spiritual transformational process. In this case, what we're seeing is a thunderbird and a human. There's these hidden strings that the wearer would use to open and close the mask during this ritual dance. So here it is closed. Here it is open. We see the ancestor. You just see the decoration on the inside. So one commonality you may see is that across many tribes there's these geometric patterns. So here's the video you're to watch. And there's many of these types of masks. Now, unfortunately, potlatches were made illegal for a long period of time, and many of these objects were acquired by museums, etc. And there's many pushes for repatriation for these art objects to be returned to be used in a more functional manner to the original tribes to which they belong. So here's an example within the full dress, the full costume, during a potlatch ceremony. This mask inspired the Seahawks logo through 2001. And from everything that I have found is that the tribe was really proud of this, is that they were excited that their imagery was represented for a hockey team. Our museum has one. Okay. Okay, so this hide painting is by Katsi Cody Tioga, and this is of the Wind River from Wyoming. Now, again, this is an example, a great example of adaptation in how human beings do what they need to do to survive. We're at a time period where most Native American tribes have been moved to reservations. There are actually numerous tribes sent to one reservation, and so there's influences of artistic styles on different other First Nations. And this is also a time period in which the buffalo has pretty much been hunted to extinction, which was a major part, at least for this region, when we're looking at Wyoming and the Midwest, and how these objects where every aspect of the buffalo was used for the survival of the tribe. And so when you've been moved to a different region, when your food source and livelihood has been removed from the food chain, what do? And here's an example of where Katsi Cody is he's adapting these hides to be essentially sold as a tourist object to Westerners. And so originally, a real one was used as a robe or as a teepee wall, as a sign of prestige. If it was worn by a person, it would have shown major battles or celebrating different things that individual was proud of. And so that's been adapted into an object to be sold on the market for a livelihood. And so what we're seeing here is this buffalo hunt. Notice the many, many buffaloes. But again, this is nostalgic because the buffaloes have been hunted to near extinction purposefully. And so there's also elements of this wolf dance that we see here with these individuals with the bent limbs that indicates movement. Many of these dances had been completely made illegal. This one was not as an important dance. Well, they're all important, but he was able to represent this on the hide without getting in as much trouble for depicting illegal dance. And again, so this is the idea of what these Westerners are thinking of Indigenous Americas, and so they would purchase these objects to play off of that idea of the Native American. So here's another example. We also see depicted on here specifically the Shoshone teepees. So most of these peoples would have been nomadic, following their food source, and so teepees are rather than a permanent space, they're more easily taken down and then moved to a new place. So here we have the Shoshone teepee represented. Okay. So again, this is more of like a nostalgic and again Western tourist object that we're looking at. At this point, most people were also using guns, which had been introduced by Europeans. And so the use of these bow and arrows are also part of this idea of this nostalgic idea and what Westerners think of when they think of Native Americans. So here's this black on black ceramic vessel by Maria Martinez and her husband Julian Martinez. However, her name is mostly on them. So this is of the Puebloan tribe, and it had been, the way to make this had actually been lost for centuries. And so Maria Martinez and her husband were part of the group that was excavating an area that had been, excavating an area of ancient Pueblo, or not ancient, but of Pueblo goods. And so they started to, they started to experiment with ways in which to make these objects, these vessels, and they figured out how to do so. Note that this is done with more traditional means. There's not a potter's wheel involved with this. It's made by hand, these coiled shapes of clay. And then they would do this slip process and polishing and really rubbing it until it's shining and firing it in a certain way. And so it also has to be fired in a low oxygen environment to create this more blackened-ware ceramic look that we see here. And she was actually, so Julian was more part of the excavation team. Maria was the cook for the team. But they both had studied this black on black pottery sherds that they found at this excavation. And so again, through many experiments, they figured out how to create them. And so they shared this style with the Pueblo people. Now it became a really sought after commodity, these art objects. And she was really encouraged to sign her name on it. And they still sell for a significant amount. We have one at our museum. And so in real life, these would have been produced by a team. There would have been an individual doing each aspect of this art of this object. And so it's this foreign idea that one person is signing their name on it, when really it would have been a team to create this. And what she also did is, once she reintroduced it to the Pueblo people, is that in order to help sales and to help them benefit from it, if another person had produced it, she'd sign her name on it so it could be sold for a lot of money. And so she helped the tribe to which this originally belonged to in the style. And so here is our last object of our American and Canadian First Nations.